Seoul-Moscow relations have become strained since the outbreak of Russia's war in Ukraine. When President Vladimir Putin began noticeably deepening ties with North Korea, the U.S. and its allies had no choice but to condemn and cite breach of security resolutions. At this point, it is worth asking, is it in the best interest of both countries, namely Korea and Russia, to manage soured relations? And how do we go about managing it? For deeper insights, we now connect with Professor Byung-joo of the Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Good morning, Professor Kim.
Good morning.
And happy Lunar New Year to you.
Same to you as well. Thank you.
We're quickly approaching the 2-year mark of the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. We've come a long way since saying that this war will be over sooner than you know it. 2 years in, relations between South Korea and Russia is clearly soured. We've been hearing also extremely intense exchanges of contentious words between Seoul and Moscow, recently beginning from the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson criticizing President Yoon's comments on North Korea as blatantly biased. So how do we best summarize the recent scene overall?
Yeah, the trigger point, as you mentioned, is the possible arms deal between Pyongyang and Moscow. Because of that, the Pyongyang trying to help Moscow in their fighting in Ukraine, supplying ammunitions and everything. That was the original trigger point of this current trouble. And relating to that, you mentioned President Yoon's comment, but also there was a Defense Minister Shin Won-sik's comment as well. And so what happened was, I think Shin Won-sik's interview came first around 27, 28 of January, where he kind of specifically mentioned that it is his personal belief that, there is perhaps a need and obligation for the free world to help Ukraine in full scale. And he said that's his personal conviction. Of course, there's a difference between personal conviction but national, policy. About that, the Russian side came out quite strongly criticizing big time. And Korean government did not give in. The Korean government shot back and said, that we were talking about, the defense minister was talking about his personal conviction and the value that Korea is trying to sustain in the world community. But while that debate was going on at the same time, also President Yoon, he mentioned on January 31st that at the presidential office when he had the big gathering on national defense, he specifically mentioned the arms trade between North Korea and Russia could outright violate international law and United Nations Security Council resolutions, and it will constitute a great threat to global and Korean Peninsula's stability and peace. And to that also, as you mentioned, Russian Foreign Ministry came out quite strongly criticizing it, countering it. But again, we saw a repetition of Korean Foreign Ministry also shouting back big time. What Russian Foreign Ministry did is beyond reasonable reaction to foreign heads of states' comments, and it's nonsense. And so it's been unusually contentious, as you mentioned, the exchange between Moscow and Seoul for the last about 2 weeks, should we say.
And the war of words is definitely heightened, but from an expert view, because I'm reading some articles and pieces on it, some argue that it is still restrained to a certain extent, which brings us to, I think, our next series of questions. What is in the best interest of both countries? And we want to start with what Russia might consider seeing in keeping Korea close as a trade partner, for example, in the past, and so on and forth. So to what extent should Korea care about its ties with Russia, and to what extent is Russia important to Korea? Because one thing's for sure, Russia is visibly much more adamant about painting a hostile image of the United States, placing majority of blame there versus South Korea or Japan.
Right. Russia is what we have been calling for several decades, four powers that surrounds Korean Peninsula, United States, Japan, China, and Russia. And, these four powers have been part of six-party talks about North Korea nuclear issues, for instance, because of their importance. So we do recognize Russia as a superpower, world's leading superpower with the world's leading nuclear capability and everything. And what that means is when we see the military ranks of powers around the world, United States comes first and Russia comes the second. Very important power in the region, and we have to treat Russia very, very seriously as one of the main partners for hopefully cooperation going forward. We have maintained such relationship ever since the beginning of our ties at the end of the Cold War. But now, because of what some people call the rise of new Cold War, we are being tested, we are being challenged here. And what that means is that if Russia takes, with its critical stance against the West, and in big part because of what they've been doing in Ukraine, for instance, if they take closer steps with the other side, for instance, China, it could create a real problem. Well, what South Korea has won all the time was maintaining good relationship with all four powers, four superpowers around Korean Peninsula. But if China and Russia stand together and draw the lines, that's going to make the overall situation very, very difficult for us. So South Korea wants good relationship with Russia to the extent possible. And in good old days, of course, Russia's oil, Russia's market, they all mattered as well. But with the new situation that we face now, with the Russian oil being sanctioned and Korean companies closing down their outlets and their factories in Russia, the economic side, Russia's weight has been already reduced significantly, dramatically, but still because of the national security reasons and so on, we take Russia very, very seriously. So South Korea cannot go full scale criticizing Russia and have to be always careful and have to keep the balance.
In the wording in its statement, and clearly drawing a line between humanitarian aid to Ukraine as opposed to military aid.
Right.
Can we also talk about maybe the other side of the same coin? Moscow's reaction to Seoul in the recent exchanges seem rather measured and to a certain extent also restrained. Why should Russia be careful in dealing with South Korea?
Yeah, we noticed that. Moscow has been rather measured. Their reaction has been rather measured, and we're thinking, okay, what's in their heads? South Korea is important for Russia as well. I mentioned the military ranks around the world, and maybe we can do a quick quiz here. United States number one as a military power. Number two is Russia, and then you can guess number three, right? Number three is
China.
China, yes, and then number four is tough. Number four is India. Okay. So U.S., Russia, China, India. And guess what number five is? Which country is number five in military strength?
Yeah, South Korea.
South Korea. South Korea, before UK, before Japan, before Italy, all these countries, South Korea comes as number 5 military power around the world. This is according to Forbes survey, January 17th. So South Korea is a major power, and Korea's economy, they say Korea is number 5 in manufacturing around the world. After China, U.S., Japan, and Germany, Korea comes as number 5. Not only military, number 5, but also industry side, manufacturing side, Korea is number 5 around the world. And number 6 in World Economic Forum Global Innovation Index. What that means is Russia needs South Korea as its future partner when situation gets better. And just to add one more thing, South Korea is number 7 member of what they call the 30-50 club. 30,000 per capita GDP US dollars. With a population of over 50 million people. Russia is not. And, Korea is a major country, so they cannot disregard Korea. They cannot treat South Korea as a minor country. So that's why, I guess their reaction to Seoul has been rather measured, even though they have been actively countering what's being said on the side of U.S. Korea. Last point is that for the past year or two, we've been seeing South Korea rising really fast as a major power in arms trade as well, right? We've been selling, we've been seeing arms sales to major outlets like Poland and others. And so Russia has reasons to be balanced to the extent possible in dealing with Seoul.
Professor Kim, I think given the nature of just the global marketplace, sanctions don't apply equally to all countries. India is known to be going separate ways apart from the West, notably, and they worked with Russia. And as a result, we're hearing India benefited enormously from the cheaper Russian oil. I think this is only a fair question to ask. A small number of Koreans could wonder whether we could go India's way to benefit from cheap Russian oil. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, some people have raised the idea that's more of an extreme side of it, but others, some of the major figures in politics in Korea have expressed strongly their stance against South Korea's further commitment to helping Ukraine. When, for example, President Yoon came out criticizing, Russia's deal with North Korea, and Shin Won-sik, defense minister, coming out critical about, commitment, his own personal conviction that we should help Ukraine and stuff. Some of the major leading figures in politics in opposition said that's almost, they didn't use the same word, but they almost used the statements calling defense minister crazy. You can't go that far. Those kind of thinking. We want to have our own certain stance a little bit apart from the Western alliance, and maybe we have to be more independent in dealing with Ukraine situation and stuff like that. We've been hearing such voices. The thing is about that. Number one, in the situation what we called the rising new Cold War situation, we have to stay with the West. We can't stay in between the lines, like on the lines, like India. India has been traditional, what they call independence movement, kind of like a leader, right? Like for decades, India has been calling themselves as, we are the third party during the Cold War, and we don't belong to any side. And they have their traditions and they have own policies. But South Korea has become South Korea and has risen to the current situation by belonging to the Western side of division during the Cold War. And the big reasons why we achieved this status is because we made that choice. And all of a sudden, we cannot just set that aside, throw that away, and make different choice, like India has been more maintaining. So that's almost close to nonsense, number one. And then second and last reason is it's curious when politicians, like those who express such position about Korea having to have more independent position to Ukraine. It's curious, and they are the people who have been extremely critical about Japan and Japanese imperial past. And then we see inconsistency in their logic. They have this feeling against Japan because of Japanese imperial past, and that's based on the fact that Japan, as a superpower, then took over Korea, violated Korean sovereignty. They took away everything that Korean people had. This big power country invading smaller countries, violation of these international norms, disregard of human rights and everything, that's something we have to strongly oppose because we have had that experience of suffering, being violated, being invaded. So if anything, we have to make our values and stance and principles very clear what we are against. And if we don't do that, that makes us look very, very
It makes
weak.
us look fickle and weak, doesn't it? If you don't stand on more strong, hard values and convictions, and it needs to be extended universally, not in just certain historical contexts.
Absolutely. So I guess what I, as a person, look forward to is more of consistency in those political leaders' logic, the way they see history of Japan and the way they see the international affair of today. Otherwise, they can be only seen as just an anti-West. And so I don't want to get further into this.
I was going to say, it's a pretty sensitive time, isn't it?
Right, exactly. So we don't want to take side with any political debate here. But the thing is, in terms of Korea's foreign policy and diplomacy and principles, we have to uphold certain important values. So in that regard, those people who are talking about India's choice and different choices for Korea in looking at Ukraine situation, I have my personal view against that.
Professor Kim, to wrap up today's conversation, knowing and recognizing that there are stakes both ways, how should Korea manage its ties with Russia going forward?
I can only talk about something obvious and something that we know, but still very important. That is, in international affairs, conducting international affairs and diplomacy, what comes first is, of course, our national interest. So, national interest is always, there are famous sayings all around the world, right? There's no permanent allies, but there's always permanent national interest. So, whatever matters for us, we have to take care of our national interests first, and we have to look at the question, in dealing with Russia and Moscow going forward, what is it that serves us best strategically and economically? And I'm sure there are reasonably clear answers that change over time depending on situation. So we have to be flexible in terms of what we need, what we want to maximize our national security interest together with economic interest. And I think that's something that we've been doing pretty well with Russia and with other countries so far. So we need to continue to do that. At the same time, the last thing that I want to add is the point that we just mentioned in the previous question point. That is, because Korea has gained this world status we mentioned, number 5, number 6, number 7, one of the important powers around the world. Because of the status, we need to show to the world what we believe in, what we uphold, what matters to us in terms of our values and principles. And they are humanitarian principles, like human rights, upholding human rights, and values of democracy, and the importance of world peace, and the importance of upholding the principle of territorial sovereignty of independent countries. And those obvious principles and values should be put up front in the way Korea speaks to the world. So balancing interests on one hand and then balancing principles and values on the other, that will have to be Korea's approach in dealing with Moscow, but also dealing with all other partners and allies and major powers around the world, obviously.
Professor Kim, what I absolutely appreciate about your insights is that, of course, you deal with such delicate changes in international relations, but we can clearly apply to this on a very human level, too. Flexibility to changing situations grounded in lasting values. I don't think that's just about a country's stance, but it's about a person and his or her life, too.
I think your words is very kind. I think you put it the best way. In the way that I can never do. Thank you very much for that wonderful wrap up for our discussion today. I really appreciate it. That's the first thing in the new year. Again, Happy New Year to you. Appreciate it.
Happy New Year. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
If you're listening to our program using the podcast service, just a reminder that we do go live Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Korea Standard Time. So tune in and help us make the show more informative by giving us your input. See you bright and early on Good Morning Seoul.